Yeah, I don't know if I have any like specific questions. I kind of wanted to chat again
Yeah.
and connect.
Oh,
Um, and also, one thing I wanted to say before anything else is just I'm just so grateful that you're doing this twice a week. Like, it feels like such a blessing to be able to listen to it,
oh,
and I
thanks.
find myself really looking forward to it.
Oh, nice. That's really nice to hear. Okay.
Yeah, like there's really a lot of appreciation. Like, it just feels so supportive somehow.
Yeah, it's really beautiful because otherwise, after retreats or after you meet people in events and you become really close, then there's no connection again until the
Yeah,
next event. So it's a really, really beautiful thing to do. And I think that as technology gets better, more people will be doing it. So it'll be one day, maybe in 10 years' time, it will be as if we're all sitting in the same room. We'll put on our little headset. It'll be so amazing.
yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah, and there's this sense of familiarity also after having met you actually personally in
Yeah,
summer.
yeah,
There's like more closeness or familiarity than if it had been just, watching this the
yeah,
whole time.
yeah.
So there's, yeah. I thought that if I didn't call online, I would probably do a session again sometime because it's just, and I was really so bummed that I couldn't come to Spain this time.
Yeah, yeah.
Just wasn't in the flow, but I'll be looking for your retreats next year whenever that happens.
Yeah, it's I just have to turn your volume down, but yeah, it's a lot though to keep taking time off work, and that one's quite a long one as well. I'm just
Yeah.
decreasing your volume. It's going, it's blasting my headphone system.
I wonder like what I would want to talk about or explore with you. And I mean, as you know, all the questions I've asked so far have kind of involved the topic of flip-flopping, which has been so
Yeah,
present for me lately, and that's still been very much ongoing since the retreat. Like right after the retreat, I felt actually some very beautiful openings and times of um, it comes in phases, like times that felt very free and open and blissful and just a lot of gratitude. And I think generally I could say that there's, if I was to look at it as a process, I think I could describe it as a heart opening.
yeah,
Like, and and that comes sometimes, or it feels to me like it comes with feeling more and more, like just feeling everything more intensely. And I already thought I was somebody who felt too much or felt was very emotionally dominated. And it just seems to be getting more and more, not less. And
what more
sometimes
and
it's very,
more, more and more emotions?
yeah, like sometimes when they're positive or like when it's love, it's really beautiful,
Yeah,
love or joy. But at the same time, there's more of feeling everything viscerally in the body as well, like the anxiety, the pain, the sadness.
yeah. I,
And
I
and
think
then recently,
I think that's really
um,
good. I think that's really beautiful that it's all becoming more and more intense. I know that it's not so good when it's suffering energy and when you feel really
yeah.
contracted, but I think it's that you're beginning to totally stop running from anything.
Mm.
So then, and it can be so overwhelming if something comes like fear or anxiety. But carry on.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that these waves seem to come kind of uncontrollably
Yeah,
lately, and much more so. I also started to look at it pragmatically, like this topic of depression came up lately. Also, hearing some of the people who call in
yeah,
talk about it, and it was very funny because I contacted the caller from last week, Paul, to send some resources,
yeah,
and the first thing that he wrote back, like he sent a link about a woman who's a psychiatrist in the States who uses a natural approach for balancing the brain chemistry. And it was so in sync with my exactly what I had been researching and wanted to send him. So it's almost like a gift came back immediately after I'd reached out to offer support. And I started to read this book that you wrote and really recognized a lot of the symptoms, but for me, it's still just a word. Like it's just recently that I could call it depression. And there's so many types of this, whatever this is. And for some people, it's more like they're not in touch with their feelings and they feel like sleepy and dead inside and are kind of like, yeah, a little bit dead. That's one side. And for me, it's the opposite, like intense feelings. And for instance, lately I've been feeling a lot of sadness, like a lot of blues. And hypersensitive to anything. Like a funny thing that happened was that I discovered this musician Um, and Actually, this is something that happened my whole life. Like certain pieces of music or musicians, especially those that have a very intense emotional or melancholic touch, it's almost like you would get under my skin and I lose myself in it.
Yeah.
And then I have the music playing in for days
Yeah.
and I just, in my head, I mean, because I can't even listen to it anymore. It becomes like I get so absorbed in the emotion. And I found it so beautiful and touching to feel that rawness and transparency of what this musician was transmitting and expressing. But then I couldn't sleep again for days, or I felt super sad, like super. I think it resonated or it triggered something in me
Yeah.
that a mood that's in there anyway.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I think that when waking up, you become a lot more sensitive to emotions and to feelings. And I think that that the two major feelings underneath everything is loneliness, this sense of lack, loneliness, that you're alone and there's this big world out there. And the detail in which the seeker is avoiding that is amazing. So that energy coming out of the body is so full force. But I also think because of identification and because of this separate self, it has disbalanced the body. So I think doing something like that lady, I think I was the one that recommended it to him actually. So I think that lady, I really like the idea of that. I think she takes a DNA swab and then tests and works out exactly your balance and what you need more of. Because I think of years and years of identification, then like your hormones might be out of balance, because if you're repeating a story of lack, then it's going to be, and if you're feeling lots of fear, then it's going to be letting off lots of adrenaline, which will be making your hormones overwork. I think adrenaline comes from hormones, but I'm not sure. I get confused about these. Like, yeah, I'm not sure where it all comes from. And so I think that doing something like that simultaneously while listening to this subject is really good idea, because what's happened once you've identified, so once the identification's happened, then over time, the seeker is running away from this loneliness, this lack, and trying to avoid fear. And what it does by doing that is it encourages those two feelings. And then the body's like got used to that habit. So your whole chemical balance has changed as well. So I think that like looking at the body and what the body needs and balancing the body is really important. My way of doing it was Chinese medicine, but everybody has to find their own way. And still now I find that my body can get out of balance, and I'm sure it's because of the habit of so many years of being identified. So my tendency is stomach problems, and in Chinese medicine, the reason of stomach problems. Well, there's lots of reasons of stomach problems. It's hereditary, but one of them is that your mind is out of balance. And when it says your mind is out of balance, not like chemically out of balance, but thinking. And so I was very, very badly dyslexic when I was growing up. And I really struggled with writing and reading. And this is something, dyslexia and stomach are very, I don't think dyslexia is a bad thing. I think it gives other good qualities. But getting confused by words, getting confused by ideas, but also having a strong attraction to that and being I also have a really, which is weird that I have dyslexia, but I have a really high intellect as well. So those sort of combinations, high intellect and also having dyslexia, often the stomach gets out of balance and you can produce too much acid, or it can produce a lot of tiredness and sleepiness. And the Buddhists always used to call me, I just have to plug in, they used to call me when I did Buddhist, they called me I had sloth and torpor, I think it was, which basically means laziness and sleepiness. So when I was balancing my body and studying Chinese medicine, one thing I really did was work a lot on the stomach and my eating and doing exercise to improve digestion, taking stuff to help with digestion.
Yeah, that used to be and still is one of my sensitive points as well. But when the feelings come, because I know you also asked other callers, like where do you feel it in the body, or what do you expect? What are you asking underneath? Yeah. And for me, they always are in the heart and solar plexus area.
Yeah.
And last week, it was really funny when Paul asked you the question about should I take an antidepressant. I had to laugh because actually that was something I was considering too when I wanted to chat with you about, although I know you can't actually give
Yeah.
a yes or no, but I was just, like there's this hope that there would be a magic pill that you
Yeah.
just take and then the pain goes away.
Yeah.
And I think I'll leave that as a last resort. I'm definitely doing the amino acid and other balancing stuff first.
Yeah.
But there's been really this onslaught of just sensitivity and a lot of visceral intensity, I could call it, or pain that comes up that manifests around the heart and solar plexus. And when I look at it closer, it definitely comes down to lack and fear. So
Yeah.
I resonate a lot with what you say. And then I can see how it searches on the outside for validation or for something that would
Yeah.
take that edge off. And actually, these are feelings I've had all my life. So there's another interesting thing I've been looking at that I think I mentioned to you before, and that's personality types or different suits that we seem to come into the world with.
Yeah.
So I found the Enneagram incredibly helpful. And there's one type that describes exactly what I experienced throughout my whole life, and that's a very strong tendency towards melancholy and intense emotions, and maybe even over dramatizing emotions and seeing things a bit blue. Or so at least that helped me realize that, well, this is kind of a pattern that awareness seems to manifest through different bodies, and I'm not the only one that actually has this programming or conditioning or wiring, and I don't know where it comes from, whether it's genetic or
Yeah.
conditioning based or anything. And so, like, then I would think maybe, well, why do other people have it easier? Or it's the victim story that
Yeah.
comes in then. And the one thing that why non-duality helps a lot lately or resonate is just to keep remembering that even while I seem to struggle with these feelings or waves that come, that it's just happening, like as if life decided that this body-mind journey is in this way.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, be it karma or
Yeah. And it's really not that body has it harder. Like, that's really not the way it is. That it just seems that way, that this, like, that's just your imagination. But if you were to go into other bodies, there's completely different way of feeling and different way of being. It's not that yours is worse. It's just that's what the victim story or that mentality does.
yeah,
Is it looks at it in that light. Like there is. Sorry, I just move your picture so you. The other stories could be better, and it's really not like that, because everybody has their karma, and even if on the surface they're making out that they're happy, I would suggest that anybody that's identified there is discomfort in the body, they might not be aware of it, because they might just be aware of the surface level of seeking, so only what they're after, but underneath there's always discomfort. And they have worries and anxieties, but they might not even be conscious of that. Like, I used to think when I first got into the subject, actually years after, every so often I would think I was better off not knowing. Like, when you begin to know, it's like, oh, because it's really, this path really takes commitment, because that identification is so strong. It's so strong,
yeah,
not just yours, but anybody's identification. The seeker will do anything to move out of lack, of loneliness, of any sense of danger. And not that danger, you should face danger, but the seeker is always trying to find comfort. I mean, why would it challenge it? Even in this path, it doesn't really challenge it. But by keep repetitively listening, it can't help but begin to notice it, and these things unfold. But alone, it won't. Like, it really amazes me sometimes when people are listening to my talk for years. Still when I say, what are you feeling in your body, or what's happening in the body, or what's happening now, they're kind of shocked. They're like, well, and because the energy by itself won't naturally explore It might explore if it's really, really suffering and it's really uncomfortable, but most of the time it will try to go and find relaxation or relief. And the most profound part of the spiritual path is when actually the illusion is being seen through. But that takes so much energy to see through it. And it's not even you that sees through it. It's kind of like what's false keeps being exposed. But who wants to, I mean, like honestly, if you're really honest with yourself, do you really want some of the games exposed? Like the idea of no longer having the high from falling in love, or the high of connecting, no longer being able to connect like you used to, no longer being attached to yourself in any way. Like sometimes, even though the person thinks about the bliss it will feel, the love it will feel, like, does it really want to give up these games? Like that moment of intimacy, that high when you meet someone and you connect, that will go, because you'll still have connection with people, but in a way you won't, not like before. And by itself, the seeker will try to ignore that, rationalize it, because it just is like, oh, a little bit more juice. But it doesn't even need to, even with money, like money's a huge one, or yes, but I need to get money, and that addiction to living with the idea of money.
Yeah, this topic of addiction has been very present actually throughout my whole life. Various sorts of addiction, not really substance addiction as much, because my body couldn't take it, but behavior and all sorts of, and especially lately what's coming out of this system, exposing itself a lot, is the love addiction. And love, approval and appreciation. I think Byron Katie has a saying that something like, God spare me from the need for love, approval and appreciation. And I just keep seeing these, how strong they are in the system, and it's like it's almost like a chemical addiction really.
The two biggest ones are love and money, and I sometimes think that love is the biggest one, because you get such a chemical high from someone loving you. It's so crazy. It's not even necessarily you loving them, it's the perception that somebody loves you, and that moment of being complete. This gives such a huge high. But you have to feel like there's something missing in order to have that high. It won't work otherwise. It can't work. There can be attraction and there can be a drawing together, but there really has to be, in order to get that high, that huge high, something missing.
Right, and then the higher is especially high when what that person seems to have is things that you find missing in yourself. So I've really looked at that, like what are the types that I'm most attracted to, and it really is like it seems like they'd complete something, or there's a strong polarity. But also patterns, like I think the body repeating childhood traumas, like being drawn to people where the relationship would be quite unstable, for instance, or being drawn to danger. Because if it's just peaceful and normal and quiet, and there's not that excitement and that high and that rush of feeling like you achieve or reach something.
That could possibly still play out, but underneath that, what you get the high from is that completing you. So that could still play out, as in the body could still move towards people that it's familiar with. So if it's familiar with more dangerous people, then it might still, or more particular types of people, it might still move there. But that addiction to that completing you, so that's what gives you the high. But a lot of that will fall away. So often if you've been abused as a child, then you'll be drawn to more abusive relationships, and that sort of will fall away. But then also there's going to be the tendency of the body of what it's used to. So if it's used to somebody dominant, then that might always stay. But that idea that it completes you in some way, because even in abusive relationships, we are not even conscious of this, but in some way that's adding to you, because that's validating you as a victim. That's adding, like often when you're in an abusive relationship, you feel afraid of them, and then you go to them for comfort, and this gives you completion. this gives a sense of completion. So you feel scared of them, and then at the same time you look to them as the saviour, as you're not even conscious of it, but then you look to them for comfort, and the high that you get when they're being the nice version, when they're giving you the
Yeah.
comfort and the love, and then they're the ones that scare you, and then but that's where it begins to get really into suffering, because then you fall when they're being abusive, and then you're high when they're being loving. And but it gives you
Yeah.
such a high.
I relate to that totally. Like I've been looking at it a lot lately because in some way it looks like life is it's almost like it's happening despite my will because the ego's will would be to continue doing the patterns.
Yeah,
But there's a stronger driving force that's always been there, that's been partly playing out the patterns with all that it involved, the high and the lows, and partly pushing through. Like there's something that's deconstructing that
yeah,
lately.
yeah,
And then yeah, there has been a stronger willingness to have all this exposed, almost like the feeling of having reached I don't know if hit rock bottom, but it's more like having reached the end of the rope.
yeah,
Like there's a strong awareness, or more like a sense that something's coming to an end. And I don't know what it is because, of course, I don't know. Awakening will happen whenever it happens, but what has been so far just doesn't want to play out the same way anymore. It can't.
yeah,
And then there's this limbo of, yeah, this in between place of just sitting with this chemistry of
yeah,
lack or fear, and it's mostly almost without a reason lately.
yeah.
Um, it's more visceral and more physical now than it used to be when it was just emotional. So now it's
But
acting
that
out on
that to
that.
me, from the experience of what happened in Lisa, that is you really getting to the source of it.
Mm.
Because actually that's the basis of the person feels lack and fear. Not that lack and fear doesn't arise when the person's not there, but when the separation here happens, that's the two main feelings of separation. And your whole life they've been playing underneath since you've been identified.
Yeah,
And so that's the truth of it. They don't have a reason. You're uncomfortable, your suffering was never because of the flow. It was because of separation. But this is really, really painful to sit through, because
yeah,
sometimes even when you have a story, you can do some form of emotional release, because you can use the story to cry, you can use the story to understand, you can use the story to get somewhere in some little bit of a way. But when you're just really getting to those raw emotions, there's nothing that your mind can do about it. It can say, okay, I'm going to feel the feelings, I'll talk it out, but it really can't. In a way, it's like they're beginning to really be exposed, and it can't find a place to go with them. They just are there. And that's
yeah.
difficult. Like, I feel I was very lucky that, well, not lucky, it's just karma, the way it played out, but I had the space to actually just lay in bed. And it is hard when you've got to do a job, but that's the perfect karma. Like, everybody has their perfect karma, because it's just hard to get energy together sometimes.
But the laying in bed, because I thought about that too. The laying in bed is very uncomfortable too. Like there's something that doesn't wanna just stay with it.
Oh yeah,
And whenever I actually do stay and go through something, like you also often say that it's in the feeling,
yeah,
that in that stillness or in the space. And whenever I do sit through it, then that space reveals itself. And throughout my whole life, there's been actually lots of times like experiences of awakening or awakeness, and most of them have come through these toughest times.
yeah,
Like there's been this flip-flopping happening, and but then I realized recently it just doesn't, like you would definitely do anything like look on the outside or find a magic pill or a
yeah,
certain treatment that would balance out everything, and to not have to, because actually I mean it's really, if I just look at it in a more detached way, that I can do that sometimes, but at other times it's just so freaking frustrating. Like it doesn't let me sleep at times, or if I do sleep, then it comes through the dreams, and it's like this inner golem somehow that just
yeah.
um,
And I
and then
really
I was
wouldn't,
going,
I wouldn't let it, I wouldn't look at it in a timeline like I felt this for this period or how long will I. I would just keep letting it come. Everything, invite it in, because it just becomes a new place for your mind to sit if you begin to get into the comparison of how long you've had it or how long you've been doing it. Like, everything is welcome. It's that all suffering came from that illusion that you're someone, and then the resistance to it all. And yes, it's stronger now because there's been so many years that have perpetuated that. And yes, I agree with looking into these methods to balance the body out, but ultimately it's like everything is welcome. Your freedom is in the stopping of trying to push anything out. That really is the freedom.
Yeah, or the trying to understand it,
Yeah.
because it actually doesn't make any sense. It's not linear. It's like, there's been this high and there's beautiful things unfolding in the flow of life, actually. And then the mind would think it's going to go linearly up now, or it's going to be like this. And then there's a, dip of, and it doesn't make any sense. Like, why is there more pain arising now? It doesn't make any sense. It's exactly at the time when I start doing more of the things that are fun or following passions, or actually comes a lot with creative expression, because it has such a strong emotional component for me. Then the emotions get stirred up even more. And yeah, it's funny, it's just not logical, and the mind tries to understand and plan it and figure it out, and it just doesn't work that way.
No, not at all.
There was one thing I wanted to ask you, because you had mentioned it once, and I found that really interesting, and I started to look at it, but didn't quite get the knack of it. So you said that when you actually get something in the flow, like when you do get the validation or connection, or let's say validation, that it reinforces actually the sense of lack.
It reinforces it, but in the moment,
In the moment, it feels great. That's why I wondered, like, what does she mean?
in the moment, that falls away. So the lack falls away, not totally, but there's a portion, and then it feels euphoric, and you feel like you've connected, not intellectually, but the feelings feel more connected, and you feel like you go out into that experience more. But you're not conscious of that, but that's what happens. But over time, it keeps validating the fear. It's like, maybe you could put it like a drug addict. Taking the drugs isn't going to make the drug go away. You just want the drugs more. Every time you take the drugs, then you want it more and more and more. It's like a drug. Not that you should stop it. If, as a seeker, you try to stop seeking, you'll make yourself depressed. When you feel like seeking, you have to do it. All I'm doing is exposing the game, so it's not happening unconsciously. But to try to stop seeking, when I used to be in the Buddhist group and they used to all try to stop seeking, it led to lots of depression, I think. Like sitting there, and it's interesting to sit through it and to not run after things, and that's really interesting to see the pain there. But if the seeker's there, you've got to be honest that the seeker's there. So then, you can, if you're laying there and the seeker's really strong, then the seeker's going to be wanting to go somewhere. So even putting your attention on your feelings is a good thing, because the seeker wants to go somewhere. It can't just stay there. The seeker is a movement in time. But every time you do that game, what it's doing is it's releasing more of those chemicals of lack. I know it sounds crazy, but it's just like a drug addict. So you feel not enough, and then when you get that person, you feel enough. So deep down underneath, the assumption's made, yes, I'm not enough, I need to maintain this person or this thing. And then over time of repetitively doing that, you then begin to feel an underlying lack, underlying anxiety or discomfort. Because by getting it, you're agreeing, you're validating that it's much better to get it than not have it, because when you don't have it, you're not enough. But you're not even conscious of this. This is happening at a chemical level. Just like with my training of Khaleesi, she's not conscious of the training, but over time, when you repeat a habit with a dog, eventually the dog begins to do it. So it's like a habit of chemicals being released in the body. Yeah. It's really such a deep thing, separation. And this is why we say, or it's said, that it really is grace, because you can't understand it, but seemingly part of the deconstruction is the exposing of the illusion. There's two parts. There's the exposing that you are that wholeness, which is the experiencer, and that you're nothing in the experience, you are that which is experiencing this, and you're everything in the experiencer. So that's one part. And then the other part is the collapsing of that seeking energy. And that is over time, that's like a lifetime's work. Even here, like there's been huge awakenings, this body still has the momentum towards these old habits, these karmas, even though there is no longer like this amnest that's pulled in here, which is a huge awakening and shift, and so much fell away with that. There's still the momentum towards, so say if a strong emotion comes up, I'll find my hand in the cookie jar. Oh, hello. Oh, sugar, I feel sad.
Yeah, I have my chocolate crash for sure.
So the body's got its, so, and I think that's going to take many generations if we don't kill ourselves as humans to come out. Like the awakening is a collective thing. It's not an individual thing. It seems like that, but it's a collective thing. And then as more and more people awaken, the next generation will be less identified than the next generation. Where you can even see it now that in the younger generations, they're understanding and hearing this a lot quicker than the older generations. I'm sorry, guys, if you're older. Like, not all the time, and that's not always the case, but a lot of the time it is, and it's nothing personal. It's just like the computers. You know how younger generation is so much better? Like, they're so much better on the iPad because we're genetically putting it in. They say in rats that just in one generation a rat can be traumatized. So you traumatize the mother rat with smoke, then instantly the next generation are afraid of smoke. They instantly are afraid of it. So as these things begin to fall away in the older generations, then the younger generations will be less identified, so have less stuff to move through. So in another 20 generations, it'll be a lot quicker and easier. Maybe this subject won't even exist anymore. It won't be needed.
Yeah, and in a way, it's like it's humbling and relieving at the same time to think that this is actually not so personal.
Not at all. It's collective.
It's a larger movement of life, and
Yeah.
if life is doing this awakening thing in the way that it's doing it now, like through the pain, through the depression, through the highs and lows, and it's just what's happening. Like, it's not that the I is doing it wrong, because there's such a strong conditioning to think that if you feel sad or blue or see things a certain way or whatever, that then you're just not doing it right, or there's something wrong with your mind, or you should focus on positive feelings. Or it's like that. I was reading this book about depression, about what a taboo it is, that it's easier for people to admit to alcoholism than to admit to, actually something that's so pervasive in our culture, and how many people actually kill themselves because of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, lately there's been, it goes in phases, but also sometimes comes this beautiful sense of this is really so not personal, and who knows, maybe what's being done here now is for the next generations or for whatever. Like, it is
totally.
It's just the flow of life, the way it's.
And this is what our society does, and this is what's really sad about our society, but it will change, is that they say happiness is your responsibility. So if you're unhappy, then you've done something wrong. And this is partly why depression is so shameful, because with alcoholism, we can kind of understand that it's uncontrollable, but we think that our happiness is controllable. And so therefore, the people, if you have depression or if you don't go along with the flow, there is something desperately wrong with you, which isn't the case at all. And it's the same with mental illnesses of any type. It's totally not accepted in our society, and they're not even mental illnesses. That it's just that they become mental illnesses because of the way that our society is structured. Like, you don't get mentally ill dogs. You don't get mentally ill. Like, they all have a reason as to why they're functioning like that. But our society is rejecting so much that it makes it worse. So then, as well as having a brain that's thinking differently, they quickly begin to be told that there's something wrong with them and that they're bad. You do get dogs that maybe have learning difficulties or something like that, but you don't see mentally ill dogs. I mean, maybe our society would call dogs that have to be put down because they're vicious or mentally ill. But if you look at that and you look at dog research, I find dogs fascinating to study. Like, they're not actually vicious. They just have become vicious in our society because they were a more dominant dog that's job was to protect the pack. And then the owners didn't understand this, so they kept encouraging that aggression. And then our society says that's a bad dog, it's a wrong dog. There's something wrong with that dog, so we put it down. So if you have these kids growing up in an environment where you're only allowed to be a man or a woman, and you're only to be allowed to think in a certain way and in certain boxes, then over time, as well as their creative and alternative thinking, they then begin to be told there's something wrong with them and that they're bad. And so then it adds on to that identity of feeling not enough, feeling lack. So they keep getting encouraged, these chemicals of lowness, not enough, feeling different. And then by the encouragement of those chemicals over time, then they become very unstable because they're having huge sways of chemicals. It's so obvious to me why our society goes the way it does. It's so
Yeah,
obvious.
and basically also because the sense of self-worth is so externally based.
Yeah.
Like, because I was looking at what happens here in the process. So, see all the different ways in which it searches or what it attaches itself to.
Yeah.
And of course, a big part of it is the relationships and the love addiction. And
Yeah.
then it's on every level, though. It's like what it needs to feel useful in the
Yeah.
world. Like, am I doing something useful? Am I contributing? Like, for instance, if I can't work as much because of whatever's going on in the system, there's a sense of guilt of, well, I'm not,
Yeah.
doing enough or whatever. And then with the creativity, it's very funny too, because I noticed how much it looks for self-value in that.
Yeah.
Like, now that I'm drawing more and doing such stuff, it's like there's that short high of validation when somebody really loves it.
Yeah.
But then, like you said, I've been watching it, and it really is an addiction because then he wants more of that.
Yeah.
And then it becomes such a conflicted thing, because on one level it just wants to create
Yeah.
and express and play with shapes and colors, and and this has been since I was small, and I was doing this perfectionism and attachment to the result was always in the way,
Yeah.
because I was conditioned that my value somehow depended on the result of, if it looks good or people praise it, or so then it starts to look for value in these things too, even in the outcome of creativity, or in
Yeah. And then
which kills creativity,
yeah, it
actually.
does. It does, and this has been happening for so many years. Like with Khaleesi, I can condition her so quickly, a lot of the time, and so you just think in the first year of your life, you learnt so much from your mum and dad, and then also you were genetically passed on. So if your mum had a disposition towards depression, you will pass that on. But I don't think it's that you have depression, and I don't think it's bad in any way. I think it's your job to work out your parents' and your grandparents' karma. Like, not your job personally, but that's what's happening, is that it's all being worked out. Then, so if your mum had depression or your dad had depression, then they were acting that out on you. So they were conditioning you in that way. I sometimes think that everybody in our whole society should be given benefits. It's like, like all these things that we come in with that have got to be deconstructed or let go of. And when you're waking up, you are waking up for your mum or your dad or whoever passed on that energy, because there isn't separate entities. There's a movement of life happening, which is really beautiful. So in the story of Jesus, you know how he's like, the story is that he died for everybody's sins. And that's really what you're doing. But it's not everybody else's sins, because you could say in a way it's your sins as wholeness. So it's like waking up is, it's not losing your karma, it's cleaning, it's dropping it of the whole world. It's really beautiful. So the way that they expressed it in the Jesus story, which is amazing that it's come through, and it's so misunderstood, I think, but that idea that he died for everybody's sins, of course he did. Because when you are losing these ideas and seeing these ideas and they're coming to light and they're no longer being acted out, it's being let go for your mother, for your grandmother, for your father, your granddad, and all those generations before.
Mm.
It's like a train effect, because nothing belongs to you. We always assume that this pattern belongs to us, but nothing does. It's information which is being passed on, and there's no point where you start or you end. It's one life, one energy expressing itself.
Mm.
It's so sweet and so sad at the same time. Like, I love the Jesus story, and I really haven't studied Christianity that much. I didn't grow up very much with religion, even though England is Christian. I didn't know that much about it. And I went to Catholic school, but because I wasn't Catholic, they didn't make me do all those practices. But when I watch or hear or read about the story of Jesus' crucifixion, I just see it as an awakening story. And I understand all the signs. Like, I understand Judas. I understand everything that they're saying in it, as the way that I understand the Buddha's waking up story as well. And the moment on the cross where he's screaming out, "Why did you forsake me, Father?" And then the bringing back to life. It's so beautiful, his story. And I just love that idea in the way that it's said, that he died for everyone's sins. He died for your sins.
Mm. And it just seems that there's somehow, it just has its own intelligence, the way it unfolds.
Yeah, it really
I
does.
can see how the me tries to understand it, or still takes it. I mean, it can't help it. It's just what the me is doing. It's taking it personally. The whole process is being taken personally.
It can't help it.
And it's hilarious. Like, something sees it, and at the same time, it's still ongoing. It has a
Yeah.
momentum.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then, like, I think the me is just addicted to that sense of identity and to figuring itself out and
Yeah.
stuff. And then sometimes I just have to, or well, I have to. Sometimes surrender happens in the sense of it probably has its own intelligence, and I can't control that anyway. It'll happen the way it happens. And
Yeah.
however much pain it involves, or joy, or whatever, it's just not in my hands.
Yeah.
I mean, some things seem to be in my hands because of this appearance of free will and things you can do and figure out amino acids and stuff. Now I want to put my whole family on amino acids because indeed there's stuff that's been passed on, a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But in a way, it just does it the way it does it, and that's like the words that come are like a divine helplessness.
Yeah. It is.
Mm-hmm.
But in another way, the divine helplessness, just because I know that a lot of people, when they come to these talks, they sometimes do feel a bit broken because they've tried in life and everything. Like, that also has to be challenged, that idea of helplessness, because everything that's appearing now comes from the source, which is you, but it's just not conscious like we imagine as a human, but everything is that source exploding into creation. So everything is self. So everything is that innate sense of being, that being that never changed. So the reason I bring that up is because often I'm careful, because when people do feel like they come to this subject, they do begin to feel helpless to life, and it's not even that, it's even beyond that. Because actually, really, you are the creator, so it's absolute strength. So there is a surrendering in to that absolute strength, which is kind of crazy. So and surrendering that helplessness that surrenders into this strength and power that is creating. It's kind of a terrible contradiction.
Yeah, it is. Like, for me, it seems most easily accessed whenever that happens, through this sense that, or when I invite the sense that whatever is arising, even if it's intense discomfort or conflict or anything, that too is perfect or has its own intelligence, that the perfection and intelligence in that is beyond what the mind can grasp. The mind doesn't get it.
And then that movement might be happening, like it moves back to that creator, and that's where the power is. But I don't mean a power on the human force as such, but that power and that stillness, and that it's not confidence on a human sense, but like
maybe trust.
Yeah, like an invincibility, that is who you are, that creator, that source of all things. So it is absolutely helpless, the person in the flow of things. So the Manuela feels helpless to it, and and it's totally correct that Manuela has no control over it. But then as that begins to be seen through, then there's something else that's the creator of all, and that's your source. But it's not consciously creating like the human imagines. It's prior to, but you can't quite say prior, but we'll say it prior to that. Like that's already gone off into time.
And then it flip-flops back and forth between these.
Still movement, still movement. Yeah.
Well, thank you. That was lovely talking to you.
Yeah, that was so nice. Thank you. And thank you for having the video on, because I'm sure that everyone at home that's watching is so grateful to be able to actually see you speaking. It makes there's such a sweetness when you can actually relate and see the person. But again, if anyone does it and then feels really uncomfortable, I'm always happy to change that and put a picture over it or something, because I can understand that you're worried that about work, or I mean, I know that people have so many judgments over this subject. But I'm kind of full in it. My name is fully plastered with non-duality. I have no escape.
Yeah, and then I also looked at like, well, so who is it that feels threatened, and what? I mean, what's the big deal, really?
Yeah.
I mean, there is a nervousness about it, but in the end,
The only issue I have with my name always being associated with it is I don't always want to talk about it. So sometimes when I meet new people, I sometimes don't always fully give my name, or I'll mumble my name or something, not because of shame, but because I don't always want to be talking about it. So it's like when you're a hairdresser, if people know you're a hairdresser, they're like, oh, can you cut my hair?
oh yeah,
And you're like, and so this is the same with non-duality. Oh, so tell me what non-duality is. And you're like, well, that's quite a big subject. I think it will take quite a few sessions. Yeah, they're nice. Thanks, Manuela.
Thank you,
Sending
Lisa.
you lots of love.
And you too. Bye.
Bye.